Welcome back to another Pyromaniac.com blab session. We're going to be talking some movers and some shakers. You can follow us at PYROMAN, the number one AC. It's early in the morning. So that's a problem for me. I haven't had nearly enough coffee to live off of. What about you?
I'm enjoying my coffee right now. So this is my second cup. I'm doing well. Made myself some French toast this morning. So, yeah, I'm ready to roll.
All right. You're much ahead of the game than I am. I was riding the struggle bus when I woke up at 10:57. So we're going to talk about some movers and shakers in the ranks. Houdini just finished his second batch of tiers here in the last couple days. So we're going to discuss some guys that he's indifferent on ranking. Guys that have moved up, guys that have moved down a little bit, and why those things sort of are. I'll tell him he's crazy a couple times, probably. We'll have a nice little discussion.
It's like one of those things. It wouldn't be a normal day unless someone's telling me that I'm nuts for what I'm thinking.
Yeah. I mean, that's just the way the world works now. Like, your opinion is wrong.
Right, because I'm getting married, so I know I'm always wrong.
Oh, yeah, especially in the Twitter sphere. Like, that's just what happens. Like, you can have the greatest opinion of all time, and you're still wrong to half the world.
Hey, at least I'm making them think.
Well, that's all that matters. So who you got up first?
All right, so I'm going to kind of roll through it. So we're going to go first with these guys that I have my question mark on. So I got a quarterback, I got a running back, I got two wide receivers, and two tight ends in this section here. So the first one is Blake Bortles. Now, we know that Bortles had an amazing season last year, but I'm just really looking at the Jacksonville Jaguars as I'm not 100% sure what to do with them entirely as a team outside of Allen Robinson, who we'll talk about in a little bit because I have him as one of my up movers. But let's look at Blake Bortles. So last season he had 6 300-yard passing games. He had 5 games with 3 or more touchdown passes, 4 games with no interceptions, 7 games with only 1 interception, 3 games with under 200 passing yards, and 10 games with at least 250 passing yards. So when you look at his numbers and his measurables, you go, man, these are all really good things. The fact when I'm seeing 5 games with 3 or more touchdown games, those are the big potential type games. And I do like the fact of the situation as far as the division that Jacksonville's in, but at the same time, I just can't find myself fully buying into the Jaguars, and then it makes it tougher for when I'm trying to figure out exactly where I'm going to position Blake Bortles, because right now I kind of have him sitting in somewhere in the 12 to 16 range amongst quarterbacks. But I definitely feel like he's a guy that he could either be a guy that moves up and becomes like a fringe top 10, maybe top 8 to 10 type quarterback, or he could be a guy that's going to fall all the way back down to like 19 or 20. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, where it's like I really need to have more information on him to make a better quality decision of where I think it's going to go. I mean, I like his growth, being that he's a young quarterback and he should be developing with these guys. And I think a benefit for him still is that I don't believe that they have a real strong running game. I don't know what your thoughts are there.
I mean, that's the thing. The thing is, you're not going to get any more information on Blake Bortles. Like, at this point, their offseason is wrapped up. The coaching staff's not changing anything, so you're not going to get any more influx of information. Like, where you think Blake Bortles should be now is sort of where you have to keep him, because nothing's going to change. All you're going to get is coach speak about how great Blake Bortles looks in camp, how he looks like he lost some weight, and he looks slimmer and faster, and he looks stronger, and his arm looks great, and the chemistry with Allen Hurns and Allen Robinson is amazing. Like, you're not going to get any additional information to sort of change your view. So I think he's right there as a top 10 quarterback, like the very last top 10 quarterback, in my opinion. Right after Eli Manning, who I have a little bit more trust in, then Blake Bortles, just because McAdoo's taking over that team, and they're going to throw it. That's when they've been most successful. I mean, the addition of Chris Ivory to this run game is going to change things a little bit, but also the additions on defense. We've got to think that maybe, the addition of Malik Jackson, a couple other guys who are, serviceable players, is at least going to provide, less shootouts. And then that's going to provide, that's what Blake Bortles did best last season. So, chasing numbers was part of their game plan. They finished 5-11. Are they going to be a little bit better? or if they're still 5-11, you're still going to get a Blake Bortles who throws the ball a ton. The question is that touchdown, ratio, because it was huge. 35 touchdowns is a big number in today's NFL, in any day's NFL, to be honest. But that was one thing we didn't really expect from him. I don't necessarily see 35 again. I think he drops maybe to 30, but then he's got that little rushing floor. He's got a couple rushing touchdowns that make him sort of safer. He's got that, like, he'll rush for 300 to 400, sort of Aaron Rodgers level rushing. So I'm right there at the end of the top 10. I'm not going to boost him into a top 5 anytime soon.
No, and I don't think you can make him a top 5 again because, again, where I'm looking at it with the running situation, with Ivory coming in there, let's say that they do all of a sudden establish more of a running attack. They don't get into the shootouts like you're saying. I think that really hurts his fantasy appeal because all those games where you're getting those late garbage yards where you were making the big collections in the fourth quarter when they're playing from behind, if they're able to stay in games longer, if they're able to actually stick with the running game longer, that's where it's going to be kind of worrisome for me. So I agree with you. I think he can be that fringe top 10 guy, but I also see the potential for him to fall, which is why right now I really need more information, which is like why I need to kind of really wait to make my true evaluation on him until I see some preseason games.
All right. Well, some people draft earlier than that, so some will have.
No, I understand. It's one of those things, right? Because it goes into a greater question too, is where we're looking at the quarterback situation as a whole. Because you have a lot of these guys with the aging vets, and you have now these young and up and coming quarterbacks who are primed to take another step forward. Now, well, can they? That's the thing. Because are you going to get the Ryan Tannehill regression season that out of Bortles this year that that Tannehill gave all of his owners last year? So. That's where that question mark goes in. But let's not waste too much time on Blake.
Let's go on to the next one. An interesting guy, Carlos Hyde. So he only played 7 games last season, and some of those 7 he wasn't very healthy anyways. They also had a terrible sort of defense and just influx of offense, and it was just a shit show to begin with. So the question is Carlos Hyde better? Is he huge bounce back season? I mean, things are looking up for Carlos Hyde because that offense, has put out some, very exciting rushers, also exciting receivers. I'm sort of high on Torrey Smith that we haven't really talked about. But Chip Kelly's put together some good offenses. Yeah, it stumbled a bit last season because there were so many moving parts. There's a lot less moving parts here in San Francisco. Not much has changed. The only thing that could change, today, tomorrow, draft day, is potentially Colin Kaepernick. But even then, I almost prefer, depending on who the weapons are, I almost prefer Blaine Gabbert in some ways, or Jared Goff, just for execution of the offense. But Carlos Hyde's an interesting guy because when he runs against base defenses, he's pretty good. But when he runs against the nickel defenses, which he runs against a ton, he didn't run against a ton last year, but in a Chip Kelly system, he will run against them a ton. They ran 3 wide receiver sets, so the defense was playing nickel 75% of the time. And against, that sort of nickel set, he averaged like 6 yards a carry. So he's able to do that. He can catch the ball very well. He's got a great career catch percentage. He could do pretty much anything on the football field. He's a good pass protector. He's shown that sort of explosion game with that week 1 game against Minnesota where, Minnesota turned out to be a very good rush defense last season and a very good defense overall, and he torched them for 168 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I really like Carlos Hyde. I've been lower on him before just because of last year. The things he's been able to do with over 20 carries hasn't been all that impressive. He sort of proved that a little bit last year, that it was sort of a misnomer. So we'll see if he's able to sort of, take it to the next level, just be maybe a top 20 back first. I'm not going to put him much higher than that.
Well, that's my problem. I'm torn on him because, number one, he hasn't made it through a full season, so he's not shown the ability to take the beating. He's going to be in a new offense with Chip Kelly, which I think can be good or it could be bad. You're a workhorse back on a terrible team. So are you going to be in games or are they going to have to be throwing the ball? and he's really not the type of running back that's going to make a huge major impact as a receiver. So that's something that also is kind of worrisome for me. I look at San Francisco's another team. It's a complete enigma right now. Yes, I know what Chip Kelly can bring to the table, but at the same time, there's just so many question marks. You got question marks at the quarterback position. You got question marks with Hyde, with him being able to stay healthy and to do it on a consistent basis. You have question marks with the wide receivers that they have. You have, question marks all over their defense. So I look at San Francisco, and this is one of those players that I could see myself. That's why he's in this category for me, because I can see myself easily passing on him and then seeing that he ends up having one of these amazing years. I'm just not 100% sold. And again, I would prefer that my star running backs, especially if I'm going to make him a running back 1, which I don't necessarily have him that high. I think he's more of a running back 2, and I don't want to be in a situation, but he could be one of those guys for me as a guy who might be targeting wide receivers that I got to look at as a running back 1, right? And that worries me a little bit, that if I have to put all my eggs in his basket as my top running back. So that's kind of where my situation is with him. And again, I wish I had a little bit more data. I wish he had been, playing more and been healthy. And I also wish he was on a better team.
Yeah, better team matters a lot. I mean, to finish as like a top 10 running back, your team has to, have an average of like 8 wins, or the team usually averages 8 wins. The data was a little bit different last season just because there were so many running backs who got hurt. The thing is, like, when you're taking a running back as your number 1, you want some sort of durability that I don't think you'll get with Carlos Hyde, or you haven't gotten in the past. But, injuries are fickle. Like, you can bet on a guy who's been injured his whole career, and then suddenly he plays 16 games and rushes for 1,800 yards 2 years ago in DeMarco Murray. So you could almost use that injury thing, to your advantage in some ways. If he gets a healthy season, he is going to be a monster. Like, that's one of those things, like, you're getting him at a little bit of a discount because he's been injured early in his career. So that might, play into your hand a little bit. Other than that, Carlos Hyde, I don't think we'll see much. I mean, the only thing we could see is a Kaepernick trade. And then I don't know if that really matters for Hyde. Usually the misnomer of rushing quarterbacks off the edge, create a little bit of separation. But, Blaine Gabbert's a pretty athletic guy. Depending on what happens in the draft, we'd have to talk more on that later. So, but besides that, Hyde, I think, is solidly at like running back 20. And I'm with some upside, like right around the 4th round. You're like, all right, like, he could be huge. Like, that's the thing, because that's
exactly it, because that's why he's in this situation, because he's one of these guys that could either be a mover up or a mover down. And I just think that it all really depends on, I'll be interested to see where, after the draft happens and after we open up, some mini camps, just to see exactly where his ADP is going, because that's going to be a big determining factor as well. Where the national publications have him going, and are they going to be as high on him as they were last year? And I got a feeling that what you're saying is that value could be there for him this year, because everybody in the national media went after him last year. We're targeting him as like a breakout candidate, and it didn't happen.
Yep. Now he's the post-hype sleeper.
Right.
So moving on to your next guy, you got Demaryius Thomas. Who's interesting?
Demaryius is just so interesting, okay, because look, last year he had 400-yard receiving games, but 3 of those came in the first 7 games. But then you get some positives, right? Because he only had 5 games with fewer than 10 targets. So he was a very, very strongly targeted guy. He had only 6 touchdowns on the season, but 4 of them came in his final 5 games. And he only had 1 game with fewer than 50 receiving yards. You talk about a guy who had like that awesome floor. He had a great floor last year, but he really wasn't giving you the top end production. And now that we are in the post Peyton Manning, post Brock Osweiler era, and the Mark Sanchez era. Yeah, and this is the thing that scares the hell out of me, because look, Mark Sanchez, even if he can just be serviceable and do whatever, it's going to have attrition that's going to be taking the toll on Demaryius Thomas. Now, I also have Emmanuel Sanders in my list here as a mover down, because I think Emmanuel did some better things in the limited scope of what the offense was doing last year, and I just don't see him being able to do that with Mark Sanchez. I mean, you just look at the history of Mark Sanchez. Has he ever produced top-end wide receivers while he was in New York? And the answer is no. Was he able to ever –
top-end wide receiver in New York?
What's that?
I mean, did he have a top-end wide receiver in New York?
No.
His best wide receiver was Santonio Holmes, whose sort of profile is similar to Emmanuel Sanders. I mean, he's never had a physical freak in the form of Demaryius Thomas. So Demaryius Thomas does some weird things well. Like, he is a very good screen runner. Like, he's very good after the catch. He can also run vertically. And he had some troubles with drops last season, but he still caught 105 passes. Averaged 11 targets a game. This is the guy they are going to feed. And just knowing that makes him a, borderline top 12 option. Because the only thing that changed for him last season was really touchdowns. I mean, everything else, he was second in his career in catches, second in his career in targets. Yards per catch was a little bit down to 12.4, but that can be expected. I mean, I just think he's going to get such a huge volume that he might even come as a bit of a discount where you can get him, because he's slipping to the third round in some early MFL drafts right now.
Well, and I understand that. I mean, I definitely see him falling right now, but he is one of those guys that I think that will fall, but also has the upside. And I think that's where the benefit really is going to come in for Demaryius. The problem is that, even though he's going to get a high volume of passes, I just look at it from the situation that I think he's going to lose out on his ability for those huge, big plays, right? Where it's like, I just don't trust Mark Sanchez to be able to throw him the leading pass that's going to really set him up to exploit the defenses. I also, wonder and worry, being that it's Gary Kubiak's offense. Now, I know that, we saw Andre Johnson and other guys have success in that role.
10 years of Andre Johnson dominating in a Gary Kubiak offense. Like,
but this is the whole point, which is why I think it's stronger for Demaryius. But at the same time, this is why I'm also let's just end the Emmanuel Sanders conversation on this one too, because he's definitely going down, because you never saw Gary Kubiak's offense really demonstrate the power of two wide receivers. So definitely. Yes, and you're going to go to the big guy that's the main threat with the better option. That's going to be Demaryius Thomas. So I do kind of look at him as a guy that I definitely am seeing not going to be the top 3-4 wide receiver that he was being selected as last year. I definitely agree with you. We're looking at like 12 or 13 or whatever. But again, I just don't think you're going to have as super high upside just because of the offense, and the quarterback more so than the offense. But I do think you get a value with him this year for sure. If you can, I wouldn't mind grabbing him as my number one if I was going after running backs in the first 2 rounds and he's sitting there in the third.
Yeah, it's an interesting prospect. He's got a lot of talent, and that's what it comes down to. They like to get the ball in his hand. So I'm not going to discount Demaryius Thomas too much for his quarterback. Like, is Demaryius Thomas potentially like Nuke Hopkins this year? Like, it's sort of different with the age thing and breakout sort of season, but could he overcome a quarterback to have a top 5 wide receiver season? Absolutely. But he could also have some downside because it's Mark Sanchez, which we saw in weekly inconsistency, Yeah,
but it could also be the type of Demaryius Thomas that we see in the playoffs, right? The guy that just gets smacked in the face and all of a sudden disappears from a game. So, that's the concern with him. So we'll see how that one plays out. But let's stick with another Chip Kelly guy, right? Now no longer a Chip Kelly guy. And one of your favorite players and the enigma of last season, your favorite guy to answer questions about on Second Opinions, Jordan Matthews.
Oh, Jordan Matthews, I have some deep-rooted love/hate for, and I can't decide which one's stronger. Basically, they're talking about moving him a little bit to the outside, which is interesting. And he's not just a pure slot guy. He's got some size to him. He can run, a variety of routes. He's the NCAA leader in receptions in a season, or SEC leader in his career. So he's got a great pedigree of just being able to catch passes. And then suddenly, the first part of last season, he couldn't catch a cold, as they say, and then down the stretch, he's had another great down the stretch, and that's 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
But last year down the stretch, he was a top 10 receiver. So he's got a lot of interesting upside, and you're not going to have to draft him at that point. He was drafted at like wide receiver 14 last year.
Right.
I don't think you're going to have to draft him at that same sort of point. So that's sort of the major question for me is, are they going to target him as much? Is he going to be the guy? They've got Reuben Randall there who's serviceable, I guess. Nelson Aguilar, who was a first-round pick. What else is going to happen with all of these guys and Josh Huff, who's a Chip Kelly guy? There's a lot of questions up in the air. And is this new sort of offense better for him? Do they use him in a very Jeremy Maclin-ish way?
That's the thing. I'm scared of how they're going to use him in the offense. And you might say, well, okay, Jeremy Maclin-ish way in the sense of how he was in Kansas City, right? Because this is where Doug Peterson's coming from. Doug Peterson falling right off the Andy Reid tree, and they're going back to that type of a situation.
And potentially falling on his secretary's tree.
Yeah, well, or she's falling on his tree, right?
Something about that. I didn't want to say it like that.
So I look at Matthews too, and here's the other thing that warns me about him is that while he was hot down the stretch, and you said it, okay, so he had 8 touchdowns on the year, 6 in his final 6 games. He had 9 games with 8 or more targets. He had 400-yard games, 2 in his final 3 games of the year. But what did he also have? He also had 7 games with fewer than 50 yards receiving. So this is a guy who is either going to give you a lot or is going to give you nothing. I now look at the move to Doug Peterson, and I'm more concerned than I have positive feelings about him carrying through his strong end of the season from last year into what this offense is going to look like this year. Now, let's also remember now you're not going to have DeMarco Murray, so maybe they're not going to have as strong of a running game, but you still got, again, it's a quarterback situation there with Sam Bradford or Chase Daniels. Does any of that make you go crazy for Jordan Matthews? No. So there's a lot of question marks surrounding this guy. He's not a guy that I want to stress. For me, I don't want to take this guy. I don't feel at this point, that's why I have him in this category, as a guy that I don't even want to take as my wide receiver 2 with confidence. I'd rather have him, if I'm grabbing him, be able to get him as a wide receiver 3. Or if I'm forced into the wide receiver 2 with him, it's just I better have a good number 1 that's on the other side because of those dud games that he gives you.
I mean, I think it's going to be a little bit of a different. I think he'll have a nice, safer floor with Doug Peterson. I just don't know if he'll have that sort of explosion factor, which he could have had in a Chip Kelly offense with like 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I guess the real question is he safer this season, or does he have a little bit more volatility to his game? I think that's something that's interesting. Yeah,
and I think again, it really is going to come down to where is he being perceived in the national spotlight as well. So when you guys are all on your drafts, and you're either on Yahoo or ESPN or CBS, where are these guys, pegging Jordan Matthews to know that is he going to be a guy that you're going to be able to sweep in and steal, or is he going to be one of those guys that's going to be kind of overreach and you just better just let it go? So,
I mean, Jordan Matthews currently has an ADP in the 6th round. Coming around the 6th round, and if you didn't go, 3 wide receivers right off the bat, I think Jordan Matthews is really interesting in the 6th round. Last year, you had to draft him in the 4th.
Right.
But I don't think there's all that much that's completely changed. I mean, going out to the outside on occasion, I think can only help him. I think he's just going to be more of a target monster. I think his targets go up. He only had 128 last season. I think he might be in the 140 range, which gives you a solid number 2. I think you can expect sort of a very similar usage pattern to how they used Jeremy Maclin in Kansas City last season.
I think that's the key that you have to look at it for is in that regard. But again, remember that under Andy Reid's coaching tree, what is the one thing that they always want to do with those teams? They want to establish the run. So that's the other thing too, that it's, they can be pushing their offense in that regard. All right, well, let's keep moving here because we don't want to cover a bunch of guys here. How about Jimmy Graham? How the mighty have fallen.
We hammered Jimmy Graham on the tight end podcast.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Just because of the PCL injury. He's one of the toughest guys to sort of rank right now because he could be on the PUP list. He could, potentially miss the whole season. So there's some downside to that. That injury is just horrific. So I'm pretty much not going to touch him, but I'll probably rank him higher. I'll probably rank him like 12 because he has crazy season ability, having 2 of the top 5 tight end seasons ever, in the history of football under his belt. So
hold on though, you just said it. You're going to rank him 12, and that's right, because that's around where I have him. I mean, he's like 12 or 13, sitting in that range there. Because after he was the godsend for tight ends, now we realize that he's a cancer for locker rooms. He's a guy that does not show up and really play hard on a play-by-play basis. He takes some plays off. He's not the dominator in the red zone that he used to be. He seems to be more of a powder. He's been humbled. So, if you're able to take a chance on a guy like Jimmy Graham and you're grabbing him as, now you're talking 12th tight end. So we're talking about as your backup tight end. That's where he's fallen. And that's where, but again, because of what he has as potential and because of the growth that we've seen out of Russell Wilson, you can play the upside there as well. So it's one of those guys that I think right now he's definitely a guy that can move up or down. He's going to move down if that injury takes major hold on him and he's not able to play, but he moves up if all of a sudden he is able to play. And now that you have a little more balance on that roster there in their passing game, especially with the development of Tyler Lockett, I think that really helps open things up.
Yeah, I mean, the offense looks good, but it looked better without him. And the question is, can they sort of maintain, that level of play? It's pretty, sort of crazy how well that offense was down the stretch and how good it was. And they were just on fire. And it was all sort of after Jimmy Graham.
Right.
Jimmy Graham's like a generational talent at tight end, though. Like never before seen, like 2 of the 5 best seasons ever. So I think at some point when you're talking about, he's going in the 7th round right now, I'm sure that's going to probably pull back a little bit. I won't draft him that high. And no matter what, if you take Jimmy Graham this season, make sure you're taking a backup tight end.
Yeah, but I'm going to tell you what, he's going to get drafted higher than we will draft him. I don't think he'll be on any of our teams, because there's going to be someone out there who's just going to look at the name and they're going to look at the past history and they're going to say, boom, I want to take him. All
right, another 7th round tight end, Gary Barnidge.
Yeah, now this guy, okay, he came out of nowhere. There's just certain things about him that I hate the quarterback situation, obviously. You
hate RG3 who feeds tight ends?
Yeah. I mean, I understand. I don't. Cleveland this is a dismal place to be right now. He had 9 touchdowns last year. That's going to be hard to replicate. We talk about touchdown dependency, and we talk about, the ability that he had. Plus, now last year he did sneak up on a lot of people, even though he had been in the league for as long as he had. There was no film on him doing what he was doing. So now it's not like there's not going to be game planning going on for Gary Barnidge when teams are facing him. So he's one of these guys, again, that I don't like. I'm concerned because you don't catch lightning in a bottle twice normally.
Here's the thing with Gary Barnidge. He also had over 1,000 yards receiving. And he did it on only like 125 targets. So he's super efficient. He caught everything near him. He caught touchdowns because he was their really own sort of red zone threat. Crowell sort of came on down the stretch, but it was pretty much Big Gary and nobody else. And what's changed? I mean, Josh Gordon could be back. Maybe that changes his yardage a little bit, but does it change anything else? Can he still catch?
It opens things up for him. And
exactly.
Again, what he did last year that was amazing was, you talk about the guy with the greatest floor. His floor was awesome. He had 10 games where he had more than 50 yards, along with his 300-yard games. 10 games with 5 or more receptions, and 5 games with 10 or more targets. So he was really filling all the check mark boxes for you last year. Which that's also one of those things that just kind of worries me, again, because you're not in a prolific offense. You're not in a steady situation. Granted, the good news is, though, that that's a team that's not going to be winning a lot of games. So you're going to get a lot of opportunities for him to get the ball thrown his way.
I mean, Hugh Jackson and both him and RG3 like throwing to the tight end. So that gives him a pretty safe floor in my estimation, especially if there's a receiver back in Josh Gordon who they will feature or not, because I think Barnidge doesn't matter in that sort of way.
Yep.
I like Barnidge, and everybody's sort of discounting him. I mean, I'm not saying to draft him as tight end 3. That's a little excessive in my book. But if you're getting, outside the top 5 and you're drafting him as the 6th or 7th tight end, I don't think you're making a mistake. I think he proved that last season. The offense, should cater to him a little bit, even though he's going to be 31 mid-season next year. So, that's a little concerning, but he just showed last season that the guy's got some talent. He's got enough speed, and he just catches everything. And then he's able to pick up some yards after the catch. I mean, he's not Kelsey after the catch, but he catches the ball, and he's got hands, and he's a tight end that's solid in a league where on a team where no one else was.
Yeah.
And I think not much there is going to change except for maybe an influx of Josh Gordon. That's about it.
Yeah.
So
that's why I think you're right. I mean, because I think that the realistic where he should be is probably like around 9 to 11, but I think that he definitely has that movability where he can go up and to be 5 or 6 amongst tight ends.
So let's talk about some guys who flat out moved down for you.
All right. So flat out moving down, this is a no-brainer at quarterback. It's Matthew Stafford. This guy has just been on a downward trajectory now over the past, 3 years? No more Calvin Johnson. He only had 3 300-yard games with Calvin Johnson last year, and he had 7 games with fewer than 250 passing yards. And here's the one that's even more distressing for me. He had 5 games last year with either 1 or no touchdown passes. In this day and age of quarterbacks, that's unacceptable. And you look at where Detroit is right now. This is an organization that just seems that they are just tail spinning for year after year after year. They look like they finally are putting something together with Jim Schwartz, and they're making the playoffs, and then they fall on their face. And in this division, where at least with the Bears, you can see that the rebuilding is actually a serious rebuilding, where they went from being one of the oldest teams in the NFL to one of the youngest teams and are building around their defense and starting to put all their attention to the defense. That puts pressure on Detroit's offense. You got Minnesota, who has a stellar defense that is in the division that they're going to have to go up against twice. And then you have Green Bay, who they just never been able to really figure out. These are all problems. And now you got Golden Tate's your number 1.
Yeah, the thing is, once this offense got together last season with Jim Bob Cooter, it played in an entirely
love that name. Who doesn't?
Everybody does. But the thing is, from weeks 12 to 17, he averaged 23 fantasy points. And this is all sort of when Calvin Johnson was a little bit hobbled and not the same player. So, is he – I think he takes a little bit of a step back. We got to remember, that was only his second season of his career throwing 30-plus touchdowns. Like, after all the sort of talks about how bad he's been, like, that was the second best season of his career, sort of under the radar. They've got some other weapons there, adding Marvin Jones, who's serviceable, but not Calvin Johnson.
But this is the problem, though, Stags, because, again, if this is his second 30-plus touchdown season, we talk about Blake Bortles, who threw 35 last year. In this NFL nowadays, you need to be throwing – if you're going to be effective in fantasy, you need to be throwing for over 30-plus – probably like about 35 touchdowns plus, and you need to be throwing for at least 42 to 4,400 yards. So, where Stafford was the guy who was at around the 5,000 yard mark, then we've seen that digress and fall apart on him. So he's just a guy that just has never been able to take that next step. You have all this talent around you and you couldn't take the next step. Why am I supposed to believe that he's going to do it now? I'm not believing it. And what's crazy is I have him, I want to say, I think I have him ranked around 19 or 20 amongst my quarterbacks.
The thing is, like, he finished as a top 10 quarterback last season. He's got some interesting weapons on Ebron, the running backs, Abdullah, who should be able to do some things. Theo Riddick out of the backfield, and slot. TJ Jones is a pretty good player. I like his sort of talent. Then you got Marvin Jones and Golden Tate.
But they're all unproven.
Yeah, it's a lot of unproven. I mean, there's some proven in there. Golden Tate's proven. Marvin Jones is.
But Golden Tate has never proven that he can be the number 1. Marvin Jones has never proven that he can be like a consistent, solid number 2. He's been decent, as you say. Eric Ebron, we're waiting for him to take that next step and to prove that his first-round high draft status. Amir Abdullah failed to produce last year like everyone thought. And now you're cutting on Theo Riddick? I mean, are you Mo?
Theo Riddick's sort of the man. Like, he's not a great running back, but he's a great pass-catching running back.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying to draft Matthew Stafford as your QB1. You should absolutely not do that. But, if you want to take him, later in the game and you can get him around QB 15, I've actually got him ranked lower than you do. I've got him ranked to QB 20. So, I mean, he's got some interesting. I need to move him ahead of Jameis, though.
See, okay, we disagree on that one because Jameis is one of those guys that I'm looking at as a potential break into the top 10. So
Matthew Stafford has some warts. Everybody does sort of after QB5, but it's sort of that long mush of tears to where that he had his career high in completion percentage last year. Under Jim Bob Cooter, his completion percentage skyrocketed even more. So could it just be the offensive coordinator and not solely on Megatron? We'll see.
Let me group a couple guys in here together because they're both Green Bay Packers. So let's talk about Eddie Lacy and Randall Cobb. Two guys who fell off the table last year, right? I'm not going to buy in. I never really bought into the Eddie Lacy thing until last year when I made the stupid comment of saying, well, if you're going to go for a first-round running back, Eddie Lacy's got to be the safest pick out of anybody. Okay, I mean that didn't work. True. I look at a guy like Lacy again with the problems with him being able to control his weight. With him, he just hasn't shown the dedication that's going to make him have a long career. So he's one of these guys that I kind of see just kind of really petering out and moving down because of ineffectiveness, because of an unwillingness to really hone his craft and to become a better player. And then on the other side, you got Randall Cobb, who I think is just proven that, he was able to work at all these different situations because mostly of Aaron Rodgers. And when you didn't have Jordy Nelson out there, I think obviously Jordy coming back is going to be a huge boost to him. But at the same time, he just doesn't have the speed that is necessary to be that dominant type receiver that it looked like he was going to be. And I've been ward off of him, especially when I look at he had 10 games last year with less than 50 yards. 100-yard game, which came in week 2. 6 touchdowns, 3 of which came in week 3. A measly 10.5 yards per reception average. Those are things that just scare the bejesus out of me with Randall Cobb, is to say, man, this was a guy who was a rock-solid wide receiver 2, if not borderline wide receiver 1 the past couple years before that. And now I'm looking at him as do I want to have him as my wide receiver 3?
I mean, I think the offense as a whole just rebounds. I mean, we've seen year after year after year of these guys being dominant. So why am I going to take just a 1-year sample size without their best outside threat sort of out of the equation? I mean, if we're looking at just the past 3 years, which is a decent sample size since Eddie Lacy's been there, Eddie Lacy has averaged 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns, and that's just averaging the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. So if we look at only the first 2 years, he's had 1,100 yards in each season, 8 to 10 touchdowns, catching the ball at 300 to 400 yards. He just does everything so well on the football field that I cannot just take out one season and say Eddie Lacy sucks.
Well, here's what I'll say. Eddie Lacy. Here's where I'll give you the credit for Randall Cobb, because I think if Eddie Lacy does suck, which I kind of think if he doesn't suck, he's going to be mediocre. It's kind of how I'm looking at it at best. I think that might play actually into making me wrong on the Randall Cobb thing here, because then you're going to get Aaron Rodgers, who's not just going to sit there and just pound the ball away with the running game if it's ineffective. He's going to implement a short passing game, in which case Randall Cobb becomes a guy that's going to be able to work those slots and be more available in those type of situations.
Yeah, I mean, I just think the whole offense is going to get it back together. So as much as Eddie Lacy sucked last year, He still finished as, a top 2 back. Let's see. His yards per carry was pretty much solidly in line with his rookie year. He had, 758, and 5 total touchdowns. His touchdowns fell a little bit. But if you look at just big games, he had 300-yard games. He had, 6 games of 80-plus yards, because Eddie Lacy was never a guy who had a ton of 100-yard games. He'd always end up in the 80-yard range with a touchdown. So if you just look at, pure numbers, you're going to be underwhelmed with Eddie Lacy. The thing is, he can get back to that level. Like, saying Eddie Lacy sucks major donkey dick is more far-fetched than him coming back and having a good season. Like, I've got him ranked as like a top 12 running back.
But the problem that I have with Lacy, though, is that he needs the touchdowns, right? Because, you look at him and you think that he's a workhorse back. He only had 2 games with more than 20 carries.
Yeah.
So
I mean, yeah, he needs the touchdowns, but so does every other player in the league.
Well, I know, but that was always the thing that people were saying, oh, well, look at what at least all my friends that were Packer fans saying, look, Eddie Lacy's going to become this touchdown guy. And I'm like, all of a sudden, Aaron Rodgers is going to stop throwing the ball when they get in the red zone?
He's not.
No. And Lacy had 3 rushing touchdowns last year.
Can Eddie Lacy get back to having, instead of 3, can he get back to having, 8 to 10?
Well, that's the question.
Total touchdowns.
Right.
Because he had 5 total, and then he had 13 the year before that, and then 11 before that. Like, he's been a proven touchdown maker on a good offense. The offense wasn't as good last season. He didn't score as many touchdowns. Like, that makes sense to me. Like, I see Eddie Lacy coming back. Randall Cobb, I see him coming back, but the year before he was very touchdown dependent, scored a huge amount of red zone touchdowns. So I don't think that sort of maintains. But I also don't think he's a 800 yard receiver, sort of like he was last year. He was sort of ugly, 5 for 50 last year, and that's the number I sort of hate. Yeah. So if you're looking at Cobb next year, you're just hoping that getting back Jordy Nelson is going to open up things for him. He's going to probably catch 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. I mean, just looking at.
Well, he also has the benefit of the fact that Devontae Adams was unable to catch anything last year.
Yeah. So I just think this offense as a whole rebounds. And, D-Rex sort of disagrees that why should he believe that? I don't know if you're feeling this offense is going to rebound or not.
Well, I think that this offense is going to it's going to rebound, but at the same time, I just see it becoming more of that Aaron Rodgers-led team that does not rely as heavily on Eddie Lacy. They're not going to let Eddie Lacy be the reason why they're going to not be successful next year.
Yeah, I mean, I see that a little bit too, but then I just think that they want Eddie Lacy to be their guy, sort of in a way, to take a little bit of pressure off Aaron Rodgers every now and then be the grinder late. So we'll see.
Tell him to lay off the cheese curds.
He's already lost like 50 pounds, man. Like, he looks good.
Yeah, well, the fact is that he had to lose 50 pounds. That's not good.
Yeah, you're right. I can't disagree with that. So the next guy on your list, we can talk about a little bit. Emmanuel Sanders, we already hit. So Charles Clay.
Yeah, Charles Clay, you just need to run away from him. I bought into the hype last year. It was a mistake. You look at.
Yeah, we gave you a lot of shit on the podcast.
Well, and you know what? That was funny is that Dog was actually with me on that, but he'll probably.
I know.
He'll probably then say that it wasn't his guy; it was my guy. So he had 100-yard game last year. 4 games, he had just 1 catch in. So he was like a non-factor in a bunch of games. He only played in 13, remember, because he left at the end of the year with the injury. He only had 2 games with 10 or more targets, and those came early in the year, and only had 5 games with 5 or more receptions. So you were getting a lot of the low floor, and you weren't getting enough of the high-end type production. And again, when I look at this Buffalo situation, I like Tyrod Taylor. I like the things that they have going on there. But the guy who I'm super high on there is Sammy Watkins. It's sure as hell not Charles Clay anymore. So I think Clay is an average, good, decent tight end to have on a team. But as a fantasy type guy, I mean, this is really a guy now who is in that 13 to 15 range just amongst tight ends.
I mean, the thing is, even in the 13 to 15 range, he doesn't have that sort of touchdown appeal.
Mhm.
He doesn't have that, just upside that most of these other guys, when we talk tight end 13 to 15 do, Ladarius Green, potentially Kobe Fleener, Dwayne Allen. Like, these guys are all in the same range, and I'm not taking Charles Clay ahead of any of those guys. Are you serious?
And I'll tell you what, there's even a guy that's like even lower, but that has more upside that I would rather take a chance on, like a guy like Clive Walford.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, with Charles Clay, he's a lot better in PPR leagues. Like, you can know that. He's not going to score more than maybe 7 touchdowns.
But he wasn't fantastic in PPR leagues when you get 4 games with 1 catch.
Yeah, that was sort of weird. But in between the game where he had 1 catch, he had 9 in each of those games. Like, they featured him a bit more in the offense early in the season, and then he sort of got banged up, and they moved away from him a little bit. So that's part of the question is health going to be there? Like, he could be a guy who catches 70 passes for 750 yards, but scores like 6 touchdowns, tops. Like, that's what scares you about him a little bit. Like, he's not going to be a huge touchdown producer for you. He needs just huge volume to be involved in this offense. And, when they throw it just 30 times a game with Tyrod Taylor, that's very concerning. I mean, let's see. And 14 of those targets are going to go to Sammy Watkins, and a couple are going to go to the running backs. And so what does that leave you with Charles Clay? Maybe 5 targets a game on average. He's got some warts, but I can't find a good reason to draft them even in a PPR league. Like, it's just like I'd much rather in that range have guys with higher upsides.
I agree. I 100% agree.
All right, so we sort of talked about a guy who's moving up for you there. We're talking about a Sammy Watkins.
Yep.
What do you think?
Well, look, I look at Sammy Watkins, and look, he had 500-yard games last year. He had 4 games with 10 or more targets. Now, the encouraging fact about that is that all of those came in his final 6 games of the year. He had 7 of his 13 games with 5 or more receptions, and the incredible part for him was he only had 60 catches last year, 9 touchdowns. So 15% of his catches were touchdowns. And I look at him as being a guy that now I think they realize we need to start featuring him more. He's going to see the uptick in targets. Now, is that going to mean that his yards per reception is going to come down? Sure, that's fine. But he's still going to be able to maintain that touchdown mark, again, because you already said Charles Clay is not a touchdown guy. Who do you have otherwise there that's really stealing touchdowns away from him? Is it Woods? Is it Hogan? No. So you're not going to be stealing touchdowns away from him there. The biggest concern that he'll have is Tyrod Taylor running for scores, right? So
maybe Carlos Williams, LaShawn McCoy, Tyrod Taylor. This should be a team that scores a lot of rushing touchdowns.
Rex Ryan.
Yeah, this should be a team that scores a lot of rushing touchdowns. But, over the last 5 weeks of the season, Sammy Watkins was a top 5 wide receiver. He got a boatload of targets over that stretch. And even though, he didn't average over 10, he had 47 targets in 5 games. So, only caught 29 passes. So, he's a little bit of a guy who gets a little bit of a knock in PPR leagues, but not much to make it noticeable. But, the things, he was able to score touchdowns. He was able to make big plays. And then you watched him on Thursday Night Football, and he was able to sort of beat up Darrelle Revis for a while. Well, Tyrod just couldn't get him the ball.
Right. Well, you want to know what's interesting? Because remember, he went to school with Martavis Bryant, who's now out. Remember, all the connections I was making was Martavis had the exact same measurables as Sammy Watkins, but was actually a little bit better in some aspects. Well, now we're seeing the difference is that Sammy Watkins has a better head on his shoulders, obviously, than Martavis does. And with all those same measurables, that's why you're seeing the amazing ability for him to take those 60 catches and turn them into huge production. But I think that's what you're going to see a lot more of from him as we go forward, because again, you're going to give him more chances. And again, there's not any challenge out there from anybody else. And I think that finally, now that you have you're coming back with the same quarterback, Rex Ryan understands what he has there. Yes, he's going to lean on the run, but look, they recognize toward the end of the year that Sammy Watkins has to be a major contributor if they're going to be a viable team in this NFL.
I mean, also he's just 20. He's going to be 23 in 2 months.
Yeah, he's so young.
He's so young. He's younger than some of these guys entering the draft now. He's just not yet refined. He averaged 13.2 fantasy points a game last year. I just think the sky's the limit to what I think Sammy Watkins could be a borderline top 5 next year.
I think so as well. I have him top 10. I think I have number 6. He's now at number 6 right now.
Oh, wow. You got him a little bit higher than I do. I've got him right, I think, at 8. Because I've got AJ Green and Allen Robinson ahead of him.
I got Allen Robinson ahead of him, who I also have on this list of mover-ups. So why don't we roll into Allen Robinson? So, and AJ Green, I think, is that steady guy, but I have these guys above them. And the thing, again, with Allen Robinson for me is here's a guy that I just love the fact that the high floor that he had. 10 or more targets in 7 games, 11 games with 5 or more receptions. So he's giving you the consistency of the production. He had 600-yard games and a couple of huge monster games. He had 10 games with a touchdown catch and 3 games with 2 or more touchdown catches, and only 2 games with fewer than 50 yards receiving, with an audacious 17.5 yards per reception average. I mean, go ahead.
He's a little bit younger than Sammy Watkins. He's not quite the speedster that Watkins is, but I think there's just some warts to his game, like just things that I don't think can be repeatable. And it's not because I don't trust Allen Robinson. It's because I don't trust Blake Bortles. I don't trust the Jacksonville Jaguars offense. Like, I don't see 14 touchdowns happening again. So pretty much whenever you catch 14 or more touchdowns in a season, you usually regress by like 20% the next season. It's just sort of the law of averages. Repeating double-digit touchdown seasons as a wide receiver is something that's very hard to do. He jumped from 11.4 yards per catch to 17.5 yards per catch last season.
That's coming down.
So, yeah, I mean, could he see more volume? Could he see maybe 180 targets? Like the elite guys do, like Julio and Antonio Brown? Absolutely. And could he maybe get to that 100-catch barrier by being a little more efficient? Sure. I mean, he showed last season that he was able to make big plays, and I just don't know if that many big plays can happen, because I think he led the league in 20-yard plays. But it's just sort of things that, like, if you're that good for that stretch of a season, people are going to move coverage to you. People are going to focus on you. And people aren't going to let you, get off the line smoothly and, jump over defenders for 20-yard catches.
No, I totally get that, and I definitely expect him to have a regression in touchdowns, okay? I'm not expecting him to have that 14 touchdowns again. But again, when I'm looking at these top wide receivers, and this is where I have him at number 5, because after you get outside of your Julio, your Antonio Brown, and your Des Bryants, and these guys, he's at least that guy who I know I'm going to feel solid with, and I'm going to get the good production every week. He's not that guy that is – this is where I differ with him with AJ Green, because AJ Green's going to have his 2 or 3 monster games during the year, but he's also going to give you about 3 or 4 just dud games.
So who's right behind Allen Robinson in your rankings? Do you have DeAndre behind him?
I think I have DeAndre ahead of him. DeAndre is the one that's in my top 4, and then it goes A-Rob, and then it goes to Sammy Watkins after that, and then I got to pull it up right now here, and then my next.
So you got Antonio Brown, Julio, and then you got Beckham, of course.
It's Antonio, Beckham, Julio, Dez, DeAndre. I'm sorry, then Sammy Watkins, then Allen Robinson.
So you've got him at 7.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I haven't missed out. I had those 2 mixed up. So Sammy ahead of Allen.
I don't know about that. I'd still take Allen Robinson ahead of Sammy Watkins. Even though
I'm looking at, you have one guy who had the top end right with 1,400 yards and the 14 touchdowns that know is going to come down, and you got a guy in Sammy who is showing you all this flash at the end of the season, and a guy that has the potential to go from only 60 catches up to 80 catches, and what can he do with 20 more receptions?
The thing is, like, when you project like that, it's tough. Like, some people do their rankings based off of projections, right? And then other people do their rankings based on the order they would draft a guy. And then others do their projections sort of on a mix of both, to where how comfortable are you drafting this guy at these projections? So that's sort of how you mix it. I don't know how you personally do yours, because I've got a pretty good mix of projection aspect and the level of comfort that I would draft a guy. Like, so if I think maybe Torrey Smith's going to have a huge season, right? Being a wide receiver, a speed wide receiver, an outside receiver, in a Chip Kelly offense that has produced notable number one wide receiver seasons out of, Deshaun Jackson and Jeremy Maclin. Mm-hmm. He's a similar body type. He's had a top 20 season. So, me projecting that, so I'm not going to rank him at number 20. You know what I'm saying?
Right. I also look at things in the way of goes back to my main league where it's like touchdowns are so important. Long touchdowns are worth so much more. So in that way, that's why Sammy Watkins takes the jump up for me. Because again, I'm
Allen Robinson led the league in that.
I know, but there's going to be a regression going into this season. So I mean, you have to be aware of that. And again, we've both been following fantasy football and football for a long period of time. And if you go back over all the history, how many times do you see these guys that have these Jerry Rice type seasons back to back to back? Now you got Antonio Brown. Is Allen Robinson an Antonio Brown? Not yet. It's going to take a little bit. It's going to take a bit more to get there. So we're going to have to see. I love the fact that he's got better hands. I could easily see Allen Robinson being a guy that could get 100 catches. And I think that. But are you going to see Allen Robinson? I really love his game. It's just that I'm tempering some expectations. And when I look at Sammy, I see the potential for him to take the game from here to here. Where I think Allen Robinson's here and he can take it to here. I don't think that you can go much higher than what he showed you last year, which is fantastic. Do that year in, year out. You're going to be, one of the top wide receivers of all time. So,
all right, let's. So we hit on two guys that have moved up there. Want to hit on Derek Carr real quick?
Yeah, let's just kind of roll through these last because I know you got to be somewhere here. So Derek Carr is definitely a guy that I have moving up my ranks in the quarterback position right now.
How high is he?
He's number 9 for me. He's number 9. So I like all the things that I saw as far as that. Now that you got Amari Cooper and you got Michael Crabtree, so you got the solid guys there. I like how they're adding to their defense, which is going to help put the ball back in his hands more. He had 6 300-yard passing games, only 2 games without a touchdown, and one of those was the season opener. So you have the consistency that he's just giving you in, game out. 5 games with 3 or more touchdowns, 7 games without an interception, and only 3 games with 2 or more interceptions. So I look at him on a team that's on the rise as a player that also has just complete control and command. When you see him, that he just eats, breathes football, and he has the respect of the guys on his team. And he's a guy that just is really starting to put it together in all the right things. And I love the fact that you got a Clive Walford who's going to be developing up underneath there as well. So I think that he just has all these things moving in the right direction for him, and Oakland's a team on the rise right now. I
think there's a bit of that. And we've got to remember when you talked about that week 1 opening week, he also got injured in that game on the second series. So,
right.
Not throwing a touchdown there is pretty understandable. He's one of those young guys that's up and coming. The things that are concerning about him is he sort of threw less passes in the second season than his first season. So are they going to move to a bit more of a run sort of style game?
Smarter passing. He didn't throw the interceptions.
Yeah.
That's huge. Especially for a young quarterback.
He only completed 61% of his passes, but then he threw over 30 touchdown passes. So he's definitely a guy who's got – the thing is his lows were low. You're watching the game, you're like, all right, throw the fucking ball, man. Let's go. And that was the problem. It's why isn't this happening? And there was sort of a disconnect. I've got him a little bit lower. I think he's the number 12 quarterback for me. I think that's right in the range because I don't think I'm going to draft him over an Eli who's done it year in and year out, who has, arguably.
I have Eli 1 spot ahead of him, but I have him ahead of Drew Brees.
Oh, I don't know about that. Drew Brees. Drew Brees is going to be back.
I know we can disagree on that. I mean, this is one of those things again where it's where do you feel that you want to put your chips on the table? Yeah. You want to put your chips with the guy who's been doing it, who's at 36, 37, 38 years old, which everything that we've seen in this past 5 years is something that say, yeah, I would want to do that. Or do you want to take the chance on the guy who's making that next step and taking that next progression in his career? And I think we're in. This is what's so interesting about the quarterback position right now because we do have the very old and the very young, and so we don't have a lot of those guys that are in that 27 to 32 range that are any good. We have the Jay Cutlers in that era. So
So hitting up the next guy, Jay Stu, he's moving up for you. How high is he moving up? I mean,
well, okay. So for me, I've got Stewart now. He's at my number 10.
oh boy, I mean,
I know. So he's moving up.
Me, Dog, and Mo all have him at the exact same number of 16. He didn't catch the ball last season, which was overly concerning for me. A little bit. They sort of took him out of that place. Mm-hmm. Now that they're going to be, coming off the season in which they didn't win the Super Bowl, are they going to conserve him a bit more in the regular season for games down the stretch? We got that injury late in the season. And yeah, if you look at his numbers on a per game basis, they were pretty good. But then he started the season slow and then had that injury. So do they try and conserve him more is the major question. I think he's a running back 2 instead of a running back 1. I just don't know if he's going to score those touchdowns, basically because of Cam Newton either pilfering them through the air or on the ground. Last season he finished at number 16 in just 13 games. I think he's a guy who definitely has 1,000-yard season in his repertoire for next season. But he averaged 4.1 yards per carry, which is pretty good. There's just I don't see a lot of sexiness about Jay Stu, and drafting him that high is just not appealing to me.
Okay, I'm not saying that there's anything sexy about this pick. Okay, yeah. This is as I'm looking at Jay Stu, this is a last hurrah season. I think this is, where it's the final push. But what the things that I have that just make me go really, really feel confident about him is that you want a guy who you're drafting at that point in time to give you steady production, right? It's more important. You're not I'm not calling him an Adrian Peterson type of a running back where he's going to give you these 150-yard games, but he had over 50 rushing yards in every single game he played last year. That's pretty remarkable. He never got shut down. Yeah, well, right. Okay. I'm not counting the postseason here. So, so 8 games with 20 or more carries when we talk about Eddie Lacy only having 2 games with 20 or more carries, right? So this is more of a workhorse type of a guy. You have the return of Kelvin Benjamin. That's going to help to take pressure off of him because now they're going to have to truly respect the passing game, which they didn't respect from them last year. And look what they still were able to do. So I definitely see – is it that they want to conserve Stewart more with the rushing touchdowns, or do they want to protect Cam Newton more with the rushing touchdowns going forward? That's what I see happening more. And I see them saying, look, Cam, when we get to the crunch time or in the playoffs or in where we absolutely have to have it, then, yeah, we want you exposing yourself and doing what you need to do for the win. But at the same time, after we saw also Cam Newton not go for dive after that ball in the Super Bowl because it was potentially going to hurt him, this is a guy who I think should be more than willing to hand the ball off.
Yeah, we'll see. I just don't know if I'm willing to select him as the 10th running back off the board. There's just guys that I like more who I think have more of a projection for carries, for more of a projection for touchdowns, and that having no impact on the passing game last season really concerns me.
I get that. But at the same time, too, I look at Jonathan Stewart as a guy that if you're going to go wide receiver, this is not a bad guy to be able to snag up in the 3rd round as your running back 1 who's just going to give you steady production when you have those top-end wide receivers to bring you the big boom games.
He's currently going in the 4th round, so you can
even better.
Get that to read. So Jordan Reed is the final guy on your list. Yeah, how much can you move him up?
He's at number 3.
All right, well, that's where I've got him. I mean, I'm not going to move him ahead of Greg Olsen. That's just something I don't want to do. I see some regression in his game, and he's one of those guys that's an injury risk. And I could talk about Jordan Reed all day, it seems like.
Well, and that's the thing. Okay, we do talk about him till we're blue in the face all the time here at Pyro, but he is the guy that, when healthy, is ridiculous, and that's all that you really need to know. I mean, so when you have 10 games with 5 or more catches, 8 games with 50 or more receiving yards, 4 games with 2 touchdowns, 11 games with 7 or more targets, and his final 6 games were ridiculously strong. So he's a guy that's on the rise, that's putting it together, that is. I think has wised up, especially with all the injuries that he's had, about being smarter about taking care of himself. And there's no doubt that Kirk Cousins feels very comfortable throwing him the ball.
The thing with Jordan Reed is what was concerning about me is, all the red zone productivity last season. Can they maintain it? Basically, he was targeted the 5th most. He caught the most passes in the red zone last season. He caught 11 targets. That's about it. Just 10 touchdowns in the red zone. He was very sort of consistent in the red zone, but that thing doesn't sort of continue from a year-to-year basis. Those are things that change sort of consistently. Right. I like him. I'm not going to pay his price tag to get him in a draft when I've been burned by his injury factors before.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. That's always where it comes down to, right? Because it's when you have these guys high, does that mean that I'm going to reach for him? No, but he's definitely moved up my charts, right? Yeah. So, that's where it's interesting. So
and he's going at the early in the 4th round. So we'll answer one question. Where do you have Jared Cook? Let me check that. What do you have, Matt?
Right now, he's a guy that's probably going to start moving up for me, but I hate Jared Cook. So he's at number 22 for me right now.
He's at 21 for me.
Oh, there you go. So,
do I think he's better than Richard Rodgers? Yes. Do I think Richard Rodgers still eats into some of his workload? Yes. Do I think he's going to have a decent season? Sure. Do I think that he could have a Jermichael Finley-like season where he catches 75-ish passes for 800 yards and 7-8 TDs? No. But could he have a random season where he catches 8 TDs and doesn't do shit else? Sure.
Yeah, don't you? I look at him as what he always is. He's going to give you a couple flashes. He's going to show you some things. You're going to be like, "Oh my God, Jared Cook, here we are!" And then, you don't see it from him on a week-to-week basis, and that's something that bothers me a lot with Jared Cook. And I've just been burned on him 2 years in a row early in his career, and I'm not going there again.
Yeah, I gotcha. So that's all we've got for you today. We've discussed our movers, fallers, shakers, guys that are just changing it up in our ranks from the last couple weeks here. So thanks for joining us. You can follow us on Twitter at PYROMAN, the number 1 AC. We're on Facebook. You can check out the website at Pyromaniac.com. Also, we've got a podcast, Fantasy Football Fire. You can find us on Spreaker, Stitcher, and iTunes. Thanks very much for joining us. Have a good one.
Later, Stags.
Later, buddy.